One of the biggest stumbling blocks that I see in those on the spiritual awakening and ascension journey is the inability to sit with ambiguity. We seem to have our cognition primed in order to clarify, to define, to put in the proper bucket. It's almost as though we need to know what to expect, because when we know what to expect, we know how to behave. We know what role to take on. We know what expectations to set. What are the boundaries? What are the limitations? My power just went out. And the storm is quite dramatic. I don't know if it caught it, but the wall that I'm leaning up against vibrated with a fury. So when we are operating in our normal everyday beta wave state, which is the get things done, we have a hard time with ambiguity. We have a hard time with flow, particularly if you identify as being in the masculine energy, divine masculine, heavy masculine, regular masculine. It's not gender specific, although very often heterosexual males will identify with that energy frequency, but there are many women who have that energy frequency as well as other non-binary they. And as a result, there's this sort of perpetual wanting to form, to construct. And part of that is a subconscious need to control. And there is safety in controlling the outcome, controlling expectations, yours and others. It actually prevents you from being disappointed because we're all on the same page. And as a result, what happens is we can take the beauty of a potential. And this is where the cognitive dissonance comes in. When we realize that we are multidimensional beings, we start working in potentials, meaning we start working in flow. And being in a flow state is more than just cultivating a mindless, connected creativity. It is allowing for whatever wants to come into fruition to naturally do so at the speed and form that is innate to whatever this particular construct is. A relationship, a job, a project, client work. And what can happen is that when we over-define and we over-structure, we box ourselves in and we take some of the magic which wants to reveal itself and we crush it sometimes if we're aggressive about it. You're only a friend. You're only going to be a business partner in this business, but not in this other. And definition is important. I'm not arguing that we need a world that's completely free of boundaries and lines and expectations, but there's a balance. And those who struggle the most often have a hard time with this because they want everything to be defined up front. I'm no exception. I am speaking from personal experience. And my tendency has always been to put people in their respective boxes. So then I wouldn't have to think about the relationship very much. I wouldn't have to be challenged with ambiguity or things that broke outside of those boxes. It's almost a a way of operating in the world very efficiently. Everybody's in their right place. And what I found, particularly on the reality shifting journey, is that when you start to open up to potentials, what happens is at first, things are blurry and undefined. And there's a sweet spot where this actually is advantageous because it allows you to be very, very conscious, very, very intentional, and to make mistakes while letting whatever wants to be naturally just rest in eternity without overworking it. It's like a floral design where you're arranging flowers in a vase and you don't want to overwork it because sometimes too much handling actually hurts the flowers. Those who struggle with ambiguity often are very discreet and linear in their thinking. Not all the time, but they may even have a tendency to be very factual, maybe even pedantic, data-driven, evidence-based, and as a result, right or wrong. And it's not that people like this lack creativity, it's just that the frame in which they are viewing things tends a little more towards the convergent black and white versus the more fluid, letting people show up however they want to show up, with a different name, with a different gender. Their comfort level may be a little different than those who are more open to fluidity. And as a result, they're very good at structuring businesses, structuring deals, structuring relationships and projects. And they're very skilled at delegating and helping people color in the lines in order to adhere to a vision. But they might not be the inventors. They might not actually be visionaries. They might be the optimizers. And where this is a strength in some areas can actually be a negative in others, particularly when opening up to the more esoteric parts of the reality experience that we are all having who happen to be in human binary form, currently upgrading to quantum. Because there's a natural tendency for the mind to overwrite reality, to make it conform to expectations. And this can be a huge hindrance and a barrier to the esoteric. Because when you start interdimensionally traveling in your everyday ordinary world, or through the use of psychedelics, and you start to get a glimpse that we do exist in more than just one singular dimension, it is profoundly eye-opening for a moment. There seems to be a process in the brain that takes that ability and diminishes it. And there's a function, an overwrite function, that will actually project based on this subtype of person. There's a function in the brain that will take a potential where there could be 5 different lifelines and 5 different options. And you at the center of those could be oblivious to that because your mind is wired on one. And it's wired so heavily on one that it will actually force and contort and, like a competition, snuff out the other lifelines without your awareness, because this is all unconscious. This is why it's so important to talk about it, because those that struggle with ambiguity are going to struggle with this and not be any the wiser until they hear about it and reflect on their own tendencies to want to make things very clear up front and very concrete, and to not deviate. What's going to happen is that they're going to impress upon reality with that conviction that they have, with that controlling energy, with the frame of the box, and they are going to lose the other potentials that are right next to them, that want to be expressed and observed, but need to be teased out a little bit with a soft touch, need a more intuitive approach to where you're leaning into it and you're feeling out the probability, you're feeling out the connection, you're feeling out without labels, without deadlines. Oh, we've been dating for 3 months and this hasn't happened, so clearly that means X, Y, and Z, because a long time ago in the past, somebody else did X, Y, and Z, and now I've shortcutted that was a painful experience, and I'm mapping it onto every experience now in the future, because I don't want to be hurt again. And I've learned to pattern match very effectively. So anytime somebody's doing this, then I know what the outcome is going to be. No, it's a probability. And when you're working in potentials, there's also a probability of other things that could happen. Now, how do you successfully navigate to the most optimal timeline? This is what being conscious is about. How do you drive your avatar into the reality layer that produces the most outcome for you, for them, for everybody involved? And when we are defaulting, particularly because we have negative stories in our minds, rejection wounds, abandonment wounds, those end up taking over and driving. And we don't have the opportunity of really stepping into a different karmic cycle. It's like we're trying to find the exit ramp on a highway, but we're so busy looking backwards in the rearview mirror that we never see the sign to tell us to get off. And sometimes we're still so consumed with looking backwards that we don't even see the exit. And those that struggle with ambiguity the most, I find, also tend to be the most impatient. Because deep down, there seems to be this fear that if we don't get the agreement out, then we're going to be experiencing some negative emotions. And for everybody, it's a little different. If we don't forecast it out, we're not going to know what to do, because we're not going to feel prepared enough. And that's going to give us a sense of anxiety and feeling out of control. And so as a result, we have to be sure that we think of all the contingency plans and get everybody on board with it. So we have plan A through Z, just in case. This is great for business. It's excellent. But when we get to the esoteric, that's when that is the sort of leading line thinking that can take a beautiful probability where there's not a catastrophe and close it off. It's like closing off the pass to it. It's removing the exit from your awareness because you're so consumed with the what ifs and the could be's and the need to strategize and to plan about it that we actually miss what could be that we never even consider because we are expecting the worst. Because we're primed for that. And in a world that is predominantly binary and reductionistic in nature, what happens is that we look for the logic, the right and the wrong. And when opening up to some of these esoteric potentials, like shifting into a new lifeline, people talk about that. What does it mean, practically speaking? It means that you actually shift into another version of your life where different things happen. And when you are consciously driving your avatar and manifesting, co-creating, reality shifting, quantum jumping, these are all getting at the same type of underlying phenomena. What you're doing is you are changing your inside to change your outside world. And there are many techniques for which to do this, and many ways for which it can go wrong. One of the best ways to shift into another lifeline, a truly different one, is to shift the need to having everything defined and mapped out, and to allow for the caressing of many different potentials, many different options to coexist simultaneously within your awareness, to understand that in one moment you could be seeing an old version of that person, and in the next moment you could be seeing their higher self. What's happening? Do you have two lifelines? Are they backsliding? Is it the vacillation effect? Are you reality shifting? When you allow for yourself to not define things, what you allow for is all of those possibilities to rest. And when you remain unattached, you open up the portal, almost like a wormhole, to step through, because you're untethering yourself from expectations of what you think it's supposed to be, which your idea may be totally feasible in 20 years. In a binary world, in a linear construct, a lot of our plans, a lot of our desires are linear in nature because that's how we are primed and raised to be. But when you start stepping into the quantum spheres, you can shortcut a lot, but that requires major rebooting of your cognition to actually seamlessly allow for that. And so when you release that expectation, you are allowing for the perfect opportunity, the perfect version of that to come and meet you, while understanding that it may not look the way that you are expecting, because the way you're expecting may be tied to the constructs of the past. So your glorious machinery, your thought machinery, is actually outdated. So as a result, all of the plans and the visions and the visualizations are also outdated. When you open up the awareness to allow for many different potentials, many different outcomes to present themselves to you in the same person, the same company, the same job, and you flow with it, and you say, that's weird. That might be a peek into a different lifeline. I'm just gonna bookmark that and let that exist. That's weird. The clock did a very strange thing. Time feels really, really slow. Or, maybe I shifted. Maybe not. Let's just see how it plays out. So you don't say, I definitely shifted. I'm definitely crazy. My ADHD is acting up. Instead, you rest on the possibility that all possibilities are potentials on the table. And you allow for the most optimal one to start to caress you, to tickle you in your auric chambers, if you will. And you feel it out. How does the vibe feel? How does the energy feel? You look at the surface behavior. Sometimes it's not going to match. And you say, okay, let's just keep riding through it without expectation, without demands, without overworking it, without saying this is how it should be and the only way it will ever be. You allow for that ambiguity to get you to where you need to go. And it is through ambiguity that you start to experience the wild, the unthinkable, the magical in so many close successions that it becomes undeniable. It's like a rodeo. Once you get the hang of it, then you kind of know how to hold on. Even if you fall off here and there, you kind of know where you're going, even though you don't know where you're going at all, because you fully stepped into ambiguity.